Three, two, one. We're back. With our guest, he's been sitting in on our segments and obviously adding a great deal of value. Dr. Karad France. We'll transition our last topic into our normal interview segment with him. But it's a story that I thought was interesting only because Sean teaches, Dr. France teaches, Karad teaches, excuse me. So I think there are things, even though he teaches on the grad level, where Sean and I are more on the front lines when it comes to this. There was a young man in our hometown of Baltimore. I'm assuming his last name is France. Maybe his mom's last name was France. Maybe he has his dad's last name. I don't know. They probably protect the kid probably because he's a kid, right? His GPA was 0.0 something. I don't even know the exact GPA was really, really low. And he was on track to graduate actually as an honor roll student, having an average that's close to F, in between a D. His mom said she was at her wit's end, though he missed something like 270 days of school, right? So I won't wax too poetic on this because I just see a lot. I want to blame the school system, and I do think the public school system needs to be dramatically revamped. But in this story, I don't know how you can't blame his mom the most and then the kid second. And I thought about this, like, in the end, like, your education it's like up to you, right? Like, if you choose the school, like you choose whether to attend. Her complaints were about the grades being putting him in a position that he would be lauded, which I think is fair criticism. But missing school and the other stuff, like, that's gotta be on the individual student and parents themselves. And of course, I'll post the article when we post the podcast, so everybody will have a chance to read it. It's been out there for a while. I just want to get you guys' thoughts on that. I know we already started talking about it even before we were recording it. Or maybe we start with Dr. France and then we'll start with Karad and we'll go elsewhere. Why did you find this story of particular interest?
I think it highlights, as we were alluding to kind of during the break, I think it just highlights, the horrible predicament that some students kind of find themselves in when they fall through the cracks. And I think Quasi, what you're alluding to, where I think that there is, I don't want to use the word blame, I guess responsibility. I think that some of the responsibility does go around. But I do think that ultimately, as an educator, I like to think that the buck needs to stop with the school. And I think that school, I trained school counselors. So I think that, that school counselor, someone should have been checking in on this student and his attendance and his classes, right? Is he here? Is he present? If not, am I reaching out to parents? Am I bringing this kid in and having discussions with him about what's going on, what's getting in the way of you being able to come to school, to being invested? So that may be a bit idealistic, but I would like to think that the school is ultimately responsible for the students that are enrolled there. That being said, you're right. I think ultimately, parent, mom, part of her responsibility also is to kind of check in on her son. Is he at school? Am I getting calls from the school? Do I see you doing work at home? Are we having discussions about what's going on? So I think, a lot of that responsibility should go around. But I think above and beyond, it just kind of makes me sad because I know that my good friend, Mike Dobson, had sent me that article. And then I think I sent it to Quasi, and I know Mike and I talked about it when he sent it to me, and it was just disappointing all the way around. Because even if you strip away who's responsible for what, at the end of the day, it's a young person there who, once he's done with school, whether he skated through, whether he, beat the system, he's going to go out into the world. And he basically missed a year of school. So that's a person out there in the world who, no matter whose fault it was, he's out there and now he's trying to, find a path going forward. He doesn't have the tools necessary. So I think for me overall, it just made me sad, not only for him, but also as an educator, thinking that there's more that we need to do to hold ourselves accountable for the students that we're responsible for.
And I guess I'm coming from a biased perspective as a teacher, and so I have kids like this who don't come to class, who like don't come to school, and you know everything's online now as far as tracking is concerned. Like, you know, parents get emails immediately. It's like, oh, this my kid was marked absent. You know, my kid was marked tardy. And then you get progress reports. All of that it's not like you're waiting in the mail for it now. Like it's all online and immediate. So, and I understand the story. She's working 3 jobs, right? So she's working a lot, and she's trying to do it by herself. So maybe that's part of the struggle for sure. But I had to be careful not to impart some of my own personal experiences as I saw like the kid and what was happening. I just don't know if as a school you can do more than be like, hey, like this kid was absent. I get what you're saying about the counselor and the issues that the counselor's supposed to address, but who's incumbent upon getting the kid to the counselor if not mom or the school recognizing, hey, like the kid's been absent 270 some odd days, like maybe he needs some help. But if he's not at school, I didn't even get him the help.
It's got to be a co effort, but if one element is fucked up, it's gonna fuck the whole. Like I have some kids who just completely fell off the face of the earth. Like email parents, I don't get shit back from parents. It's like I just stop. Like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go on like a fucking Kojak mission and track this kid down and bring him in? Like, I can't do it. You know what I mean? It's like possible. And then one of the counselors came to me today, like the kids who had fallen off the face of the earth. I'm not gonna name names of families, but he was like, told me some shit that they were going through. And I guess one of the kids is not in the house anymore. They had some, arguments with the mom, and they're living with friends and out doing whatever. So it's like when the situation's like that, it's like, I don't know. Maybe they need to be in the building, or how do you remedy that? When it's
wasn't the school promoting him to the next grade?
That's the problem too.
They kept promoting.
And he was on the honor roll.
He was on the honor roll.
It's kind of like the mom probably did notice that his grades weren't bad, but when your life is in such a, I don't know what her life is. She says she works 3 jobs, but when your life is in a state of like chaos and you don't really know like what you are going to be able to do next. If your son's being promoted in your school, you're like, that's one less thing I have to worry about, whether he's doing good or bad. Like I see it with people all the time with like rent. They'll not pay their rent. And then when they're in rent court, they're like, how am I in rent court? Nobody told me that I was behind on my rent, but you haven't been paying your rent the past 10 months. It's kind of like, it just catches up to you. And then you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
But he passed 3 classes in 4 years.
But they were promoting him. She thought he was going to graduate.
But he passed 3 classes in 4 years. My contention is this charter school that he was a member of, because it was a charter school, they should no longer be able to teach.
They shouldn't.
Full stop.
They shouldn't.
At some point in time, when a kid only passes 3 classes in 1 year, right? The teacher should be knocking on your door, the administrator of the school, especially the charter school, because it's a smaller group, it's a smaller cohort. They should be knocking on your door, period. No exception. So the responsibility has to be at least 60% of the school and 40% of the parent when it comes to the kid's attendance and the kids passing the school. Now, obviously, it's his job to do the work, but the school has to have some kind of responsibility, because if the kid isn't there and the kid died during the school day, why wasn't the kid noticed missing?
So yeah, that's the legal issue. If that happened, the school would definitely be in trouble, right? All local parentheses.
Yeah, man. I think that is one of the inherent one of the problems with the lack of oversight in schools that happens.
That's why you can get away with schools in those areas, because nobody gives a shit. Nobody's gonna check, and you can just do whatever the fuck you want and
nobody's
get away with it.
Avenue.
No.
Yeah, which is amazing because when you get a teacher like me or Sean, it's like, oh, there are consequences for me not coming to class or me not doing the work. Like parents and kids are like, this is ridiculous. I mean, I'm like, it's ridiculous that you expect to turn your assignments in on time. It's ridiculous that you're expected to come to class. Is that what's ridiculous?
And this year has been a fucking, this is like low ball, underhand pitches this year. I'm going light and easy as fuck the pandemic, but still.
But you know that so when we do that, when something like this happens, are we helping the kids? Are we helping the kids by adjusting how we teach and what we teach because of the situation that's in the world? Shouldn't they be more prepared? Right, as we indicated in the last segment, we were talking about how everything is instantaneous gratification. There is no reason, unless you're willfully ignorant, to fail any class today. You got to be willfully ignorant. YouTube,
YouTube. That's the problem.
That's the thing, but there's the thing. Like we have to deal with apathy on their end, and on our end, we have to have some type of empathy because shit, I've had a difficult time this past few years. So I can't imagine what a kid has been thrust into. This shit is unprecedented, especially for somebody in like high school, So we got to take that into account on some level.
And I don't understand how this has been a 4-year time span. He's passed how many classes?
4.
3 classes.
In
so
4 years.
Not one person in the school cared enough to say, what is happening?
Right.
Why is this child even being promoted? Because I mean, that's probably confusing to the child because it's like, okay, well, you're 17 years old. Maybe you weren't taught how valuable your education is, or maybe you have been taught that, but things weren't reinforced. Mm-hmm. So even if you were taught those things, you're getting pushed along. You're told that you're,
your mom's working job. Just come home. Why they send me to the 11th grade? Like, oh, good.
But is it like, did he slip through the cracks if he is in the top of the class and making honor roll? Like, are they fudging reports to stay open? Like, something else is going on. That's not really.
No, this is not a crack. This is a fucking canyon. You know what I mean?
But if he's in the top half, you're right. He's in the top half with a 0.13 in the top half.
There's no
Which is
way.
a bigger problem, and it's showing you how far below average everyone else is too.
And how can you be a teacher?
That's what it is.
School and allow that to happen? Like, not one teacher put their foot down and said no. How are we not promoting this child? I'm calling their parents. I'm reporting to whatever because this is unacceptable. Like, what's the point? It's just a place where kids, if you get to have a GPA that low and still get promoted, clearly it's just a place where you go to.
It's the fucking babysitters club.
Yeah. And who are these teachers? I can't imagine. Like,
that's the point.
You're a teacher and you see this happening and you just don't care. Like, so what is this? Just an easy check for you? Come on, like they
have the school though. It's not just him.
Yeah, I just
the school.
Yeah, it's just.
Do you think that's an indictment? Is that an indictment on the school, or is that an indictment on the kids?
It's not just. I mean, it's the school partially. It's whatever's going on in the background because we don't know what.
This is the high school, right?
This is a high school.
But how do you?
I found out about difficult about our shit. Like, once they get to be 13, 14, 15, they're kind of sinking into who they're going to be, and they're developing their ideas.
You don't care about your education.
So if they don't give a damn by that time, it's tough to get them up out of that. You can't dangerous minds every situation or lean on me every situation. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't know. It's a tough thing.
If you're 17 and you've gotten to the point where you just do not care at all, that means along the way, people were not reinforcing.
Yeah, and I'm teaching Spanish. They don't give a fuck about Spanish. You know what I mean? I got to treat like a GED course. I just force repetition on them. Like, here's the concept. You're doing the same shit again today that we did yesterday and again tomorrow. Like, it's just, you got to force it on them.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue that.
I'm never going to speak Spanish. I don't give a fuck. I'm not going to Spain or and I got to translate that. I don't give a fuck. They don't care.
Maybe you should promote that. Maybe you should show them the attractive people in Spanish.
One of my kids, they called on, Quasi, John Chambers. He called on FaceTime. He was in Puerto Rico on vacation. He was like, man, I wish I'd have fucking listened in class. I don't know what the fuck they talking about over here. I'm like,
that's why I'm like, maybe you should show Well, there are benefits to speaking another language, personal and professional.
Right, your little massage would be a little easier to get if you fucking paid attention.
The topic obviously struck us because we teach, and I think what's really interesting about the whole thing is there are no real solutions with the public school education setup as it is right now. There are no. We would actually have to rethink how we thought about education as far as what its purpose is, and I guess I'll question to you.
And what is the argument that Baltimore City is one of the most well-funded per kid, but like shit is so behind that you gotta pour money into it to catch up even, or even to break even, you know?
It's behind, it's distributed wrong. There's a lot of corruption in there too. I mean, it's a lot going on, but the money's not getting to the kids who need it.
Right.
So what would you tell a counselor in this situation, Doc France? Like, you got a school that obviously has, the top half of the school is basically failing, right? GPA wise. Right. What can a counselor do in that situation? Like, seems like a bucket for like a lake, right, that you're trying to bail out.
Sure. And I think realistically what happens, and you guys are just alluding to this when it comes to funding, and not just in Baltimore, but in a lot of the other counties too. I mean, a lot of these schools, you know, there's one counselor for 3,000 kids. Some of these schools have counselors where the counselor alternates schools. So it's one counselor who's going to 2 schools. So that question of what can the counselor actually do, I think oftentimes what counselors are trying to do is, you know, trying to create holistic school counseling programs that address some of the larger issues, right? So let's talk about values, right? Let's talk about mental health, right? Let's talk about safety. Let's talk about ways that we can create a school culture where the students feel heard and the teachers are trained properly and the students feel valued. So a lot of times the school counselors, you know, in terms of the social emotional growth, there isn't a lot that they can do. A lot of times they're trying to impact the entire school community, and sometimes that can be a losing battle. So oftentimes what a lot of the school counselors are doing is kind of piecemealing it together, right? So they'll go there and if they have some frequent flyers or some kids who are really high need, let's try to focus on them. And any larger initiatives that we can bring to schools where we're impacting kind of how teachers are going about interacting with students. What's the overall school climate? Can we integrate some sort of positive behavior system? Sometimes, you know, it's playing a lot of catch up because it's not a lot of manpower for what's actually needed. So, you know, a lot of times it's frustrating. A lot of my students are frustrated when they go to schools, you know, because they get there and a lot of they're counselors, so they're idealistic. We want to help. We want to work with young people, and we get there and it's like, okay, so 2,500 kids here, right? And so what can I actually do? So you know, keeping them motivated, but also, you know, helping them to understand that, you know, ultimately you guys are modeling the climate that you want to set up in the actual school. So if you go in and you feel defeated, you feel like there's nothing I can do, that isn't helpful. So what can you actually do? So maybe let's try to, you know, think about what are some of the deficits at the school overall, right? Maybe it's teacher training. Maybe it's knowledge around mental health, right? Maybe it's helping students to have communication skills. So let's kind of focus on those things. Maybe let's bring in an overall program that can eventually kind of trickle down to the students overall.
So if it's not a question of the ability of those who want to help or the motivation of those who want to help. We know people are motivated to help. It's a matter of numbers. But we also just identified that there's funding, but like Nicole said, there's corruption, there's graft, is there anything that we can do? Or let me put it this way. Why did you get into this line of work of helping kids, of trying to support counselors and stuff like that, if it seems like the task is so overwhelming?
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason why I got into it is because as we've kind of touched on today, I think that particularly the teenage years, right? When you get kind of 10 to 18, I I think that those are some of the toughest years in terms of our development. I think that really kind of crystallizes who we are. So for me, when I think about working with young people, because when I first started out, I worked with adults, I did couples counseling, and eventually I settled on working with young people because I was like, this is really the phase of their life where we can have the most impact. Of course, in therapy, you know, if you work with someone who's 50, someone who's 35, you can still have impact, but for a larger kind of part of the equation, a lot of their life path is already set. You're kind of tweaking. When I work with young people, I feel like we can have the most impact because you can really help them to course correct in a much more meaningful way. With regard to school counselors specifically, kind of my training is primarily clinical mental health. So I do a lot of one-on-one therapy, a lot of group therapy, a lot of family therapy. But as a school counselor, I feel like, you know, in a way, because we can do that one-on-one work with students, but we can also impact them in the place where they spend the most time. I mean, kids spend the most time during the day at school. So I think that school counselors kind of have a unique position because we can leverage the fact that we're with them the majority of the day, the majority of their time during the week. And I think also, you know, we can not only impact them directly, but also the impact that we can have on the entire school overall. There are those counselors, and even though I was talking about numbers before, and sometimes we can feel overwhelmed, you know, some counselors, if they can get a foothold and they can get some traction, can drastically overhaul just the entire climate of the school, right? It goes from a place where, right, students feel like I'm just getting passed along, right? This isn't really important. The teachers don't care about me, to a place where I feel supported and I feel heard and I feel valued. And oftentimes that's kind of the bedrock underneath of students actually wanting to be at school and feeling like, hey, this is actually important to me. So I think for me, being able to work with school counselors, I feel like we're putting boots on the ground where students kind of need the most help. And then, you know, ultimately when they need a bit more support, that's where someone like myself who works with them outside of school comes. But I talk with school counselors weekly, even in my one-on-one work, because oftentimes, you know, I'm working with them on, well, what are you seeing from teachers, right? Can you check in with this math teacher? Here are our goals that we're doing in therapy at school. Can you support him or her this way? So we kind of work hand in hand, but oftentimes the school counselors are the kind of boots on the ground, I would say. So that's why it's important to me to kind of train them.
And then my last question, because I'm going to open it up to everybody else, I'm sure they do. Can you kind of fill in the gap from, how about your adolescent? You're saying 10 to 18. So take us from 18 to 37, Doc. Like, how did you get here?
Sure. Okay. Well, originally when I went to college, I wanted to be a biologist, and I realized that it wasn't just studying animals at the zoo. I was like, this is hard. So I scrapped that, and I took a psychology class, and I've always been really fascinated by, you know, how people work and what makes people tick. How do people connect? What kind of drives behavior? So I studied that, and then for grad school, I went up to New York, and I wanted to learn more. And so when I was at Columbia, it was a really great program, but it was more like developmental psychology. So I was working with kind of Dr. Midlarsky and Dr. Luther, some like big wigs in the field. Developmental psychology really focuses on, you know, kind of some of those developmental processes that really drive students. So I really got kind of enamored by that. And I really kind of found myself thinking about, well, okay, so I'm interested in kind of what drives behavior, right? Whether it's operant conditioning, right? Whether it's rewards, consequences, or whether it's like self-talk, internal dialogue. But that developmental piece really got me focused on thinking about youth, right? And thinking about if we can get them when they're at some of those stages where they're starting to kind of crystallize who they are. So from that point, I really kind of focused on wanting to work with youth. When I was up in New York also, I actually got to work at the Mailman School of Public Health, and I worked in the HIV Institute in the lab there. And it was really cool. They were doing research on young folks, teenagers who had been infected with HIV before they were born. So mom was infected, it was passed on to the teen. So they were doing some studies on socialization of kids who had been infected before they were born. How, if at all, did that impact the way that they, you know, went about forming relationships, their self-esteem versus students who didn't. So that was really interesting for me because I was getting to interview kids, I was getting to talk to families, talk to parents. I said, I like this. I know that getting to talk with families and getting to work with youth and think about, you know, how do early experiences impact their current approach to life, I found that really, really valuable as well. So from that point, I said, okay, so I like working with young people, but ultimately, I think that I want to get to a place where I can ultimately teach counselors as well. So once I finished up at Columbia, I said, you know what, I want to apply to PhD programs. Do I want to do developmental psych? Do I want to do counseling psych? Do I want to do counselor education? So when I was thinking about doc programs, I really wanted a program where I could not only see kids, so where I could do clinical work, where I could supervise, so I could work with other counselors, and where I could also be faculty where I could teach. So that's how I ended up at GW. And that program was great. I got to work in the counseling center on campus, so I got to work with college students. When I was throughout the course of that program, I got to intern, so I started working with lower SES students out in Columbia. And I feel like that was really, really important for me, because that was where I really got to cut my teeth doing clinical work. So I got to, work. I was working in an intensive outpatient program. So a lot of kids who had been discharged from the hospital come to IOP. So they kind of step down. So really, really intense cases, but it was really, really, really valuable, really intense work. So once I got to do that, that really kind of solidified the clinical aspect of the work as well. So I went from there, working out in Columbia, to the private practice that I currently work at up in Bethesda. And when I was at GW as well, I got to start to supervise. And I feel like for me, that was really valuable. I really enjoy training counselors. For me personally, I look at things a bit differently. I think that counseling and therapy is much more about relationships. So for me, it's really about, how can we be our genuine self and empathize and kind of look at our role as helping someone on their journey. So I'm not into giving advice necessarily. I'm not into telling people what to do. Instead, I really approach the work insofar as, let's collaborate. Let's put our head together. Let's think about where you want to get to. Let's think about where you are right now. And let's think about the skills and the tools that you have. And maybe we can identify any deficits that you feel like you have, and how can we help you to be the best version of yourself. So I found that for me, when I'm working with students or when I'm training counselors, I really like that, because all my students know that I come from that approach. I feel like it really invokes in them kind of a internal searching process of who am I, and kind of how can I situate myself in the work where I'm not just talking to someone like I am an expert and I'm talking down to them, but how can I approach the work where, we're in this together, and I want to uplift you, and I want to come from a place where I want to acknowledge the strengths that you have. So that's kind of where I am right now. I'm currently at Loyola. So I'm working with school counselors right now, but I would say up until this point, I've been, pretty much only clinical mental health. So only kind of in the trenches doing therapy. So it's really been a breath of fresh air for me to work with the school counselors.
Said a mouthful there, Doc. Questions from my esteemed co-host? Comments?
So do you think that kids being able to hang out with each other is going to affect them for a lasting time into adulthood, even though it's only been 1 year? Socialization has changed for kids.
Sure.
How do you think it's going to affect kids going forward when they go back to classes next year?
Mm-hmm. I think that this year will definitely have an impact on the students. I don't know if it'll affect them for their lifetime, but I think it'll definitely impact them for the coming years. I think that adjustment process, it'll be big for them, because you're right, kind of the socialization process and those peer relationships. I think we know that's valuable for teens. I was actually recently reading a book called The Nurture Assumption, and basically it really speaks to this idea that, we've all heard of nature nurture, right? Where nature is like genetics, and we're born with certain traits, and nurture is, right, your environment, your parents. And so the nurture assumption, we've always thought kind of that it's been 50-50, right? Your parents and your home, and then genetics. So ultimately what we've learned is that this nurture assumption may not be true. It's really shown that actually peer relationships and our environment outside of the home impacts us actually a lot more than our parents, right? We see it all the time. We can have people who've been raised in the same household and they turn out differently, right? It's not about bad or worse, but it's about, it's who are my friends? What experiences have I had? So when I think about this year, and I mean, I can think of a number of my guys and gals off the top of my head right now who are struggling right now because they don't have those peer connections, right? We kind of take it for granted because we're all adults, but our peers at that age are our sounding board, right? So we get in a fight with parents, right? And we go to school, and some of our friends can tell us like, yo, you're wilding, like your mom was right, or you're overreacting, or you know what? Here's what I do when I was fighting with my mom. When they're isolated at home, they don't have that. So a lot of those emotions get pent up. They get pushed down. They're not connected to their peers. Also at school, right? That's where a lot of folks kind of get the wind in their sails, so to speak, right? So that's where we can have some success. We can get some good grades. If we play sports, we can be on a sports team, right? If we do robotics, if we do art, whatever. That's the place where we go to kind of move forward in our development. So Walter, I think that students not having that exposure this year, I think it's huge. Now, as I was saying, I don't know if it will, well, I should say, I don't think it'll affect them for their entire lives, but I do think that it'll take young folks at least a couple of years to get back to a place where they're kind of feeling like they have their feet on the ground with, okay, so things are back in order with school. I have a place there. My peer relationships, I feel like I have the skills to be able to navigate those relationships. I think right now a lot of students also have lost just that connection. They're relying a lot on social media, and we know that young people have done that in general. But still, I think that when we don't use those skills of, how do I make conversation? How do I ask a girl out? How to ask a guy out? How do I assert myself? How do I, ask for help? If we don't do those things, we kind of lose them sometimes as teens. And so I think it'll take teens, it'll take young people a while to kind of get those skills going again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Do you notice any trends or challenges with either the counselors that you work with, or things they may be talking about when it comes to their students, like based off of this time that we're all going through? Have you noticed anything changing, like when it comes to things that you've had to discuss before, as opposed to this?
Certainly. Yeah, definitely. I would say right now, depression rates, anxiety, self-esteem, way down. Conflict with our parents, way up. So I've seen a lot more of our conversation, not only my own with my own clients, but also my students, other counselors that I work with, that those kind of presenting issues, as we call them, coming to the forefront a lot. And also feeling disconnected from peers as well, right? So, feeling like I don't have anybody that I can go to. For me, I was able to, or when I say for me, for my clients, right? I was able to go to school and have discussions with my peers. Now, before, if I was struggling with some anxiety, at least at school, at lunch, in the hallway, in class, I could talk with them. Now, if I'm not at school and I don't feel comfortable texting them, right? And now I feel like there's inside jokes that I don't know about. I feel like they have a thread on Snapchat and I'm too anxious to kind of jump in. So now I'm completely not connected anymore. So I'm feeling more anxious, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling hopeless. And that's when we start to get into, I feel suicidal. I feel like I don't want to be here anymore. I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel because I've lost all my friends right now. Parents are on my back because my grades are in the toilet because I don't care about school anymore. So a lot of that stuff just cycles on itself. So I've seen a lot more kids unhappy, a lot more kids feeling hopeless, a lot more kids feeling anxious, and just a lot more stress as well. And I've seen that particularly with some of my older students. So a lot of high school seniors are like, I don't get a prom. And we look at it, right now, this stuff is kind of far away from us, but students are hurt by, I don't have a prom this year. I can't graduate. I don't have a graduation this year. The only thing I want, I work my butt off so I could graduate and walk across the stage, make my mom proud. And now it's virtual. I don't have a prom this year. Yeah. So, that stuff has kind of crushed a lot of students. And I think we also forget the students last year. So I had a number of guys and gals who are now in college who last year, right, because school shut down in March, they didn't graduate, right? They didn't have a lot of those things either. And we knew a lot less about COVID and all that stuff then. So a lot of them were stressed about, they've been sent home from college, right? I don't have the typical high school experience. I've decided to take a gap year because I don't want to go to college. What does that mean? So to answer your question directly, I would say a lot more depression, a lot more anxiety, a lot more I'm feeling hopeless, disconnected from peers, which kind of leads to my self-esteem is down, and then just a lot more conflict with parents. And I've had a lot more discussions with parents as well. Just the other day, I had a parent who I've been working with her son since he was 8th grade. He's now 11th grade, and he's really struggling. Mom is basically like, what should I do? Right? I'm trying to get him to go to school. He doesn't want to go to school. We're fighting a lot more right now. Should I just back off because I feel like he's sad? Should I back off and give him space? Should I kind of be on him more and tell him you're going to school? So having just a lot more discussions with parents, trying to help them to navigate how can you preserve your relationship with your son or your daughter and kind of, make home a place where the stress levels are down somewhat, but also still engage with them and push them to kind of be able to recognize that it's important for them to kind of engage and help them to really think about how can they keep both of their feet on the ground right now when they don't have their peers.
Sense.
Yeah, really intense, but obviously really necessary for sure. Do we have any other questions, concerns, commentary? No? Well, Dr. France, your time was invaluable. We appreciate you. We appreciate you coming on the Brothers and Sisters.
Thanks for having me.
About these issues. We hope that you're able really to continue to do the work, speaking as somebody who works in a school that deals with these types of populations. Please continue to train counselors. Please continue to give schools that resource that are sorely needed.
Sure. And one thing I would say also really quick is that, all of you guys are just as important, if not more than important than the me's of the world, than us counselors. Like I said, young people come to me when they're struggling. And so you guys are really in the front lines, whether you guys are teaching, so Sean and Kwasi, you guys are in the trenches. The rest of you guys, whether you're lawyers, educators, everything kind, whether you do fitness stuff, you got, right, we model for young people around us, right, kind of healthy ways that they can deal with stress, right? How can you stay motivated? How can you stay focused? I know, Walter, earlier you were talking about one of your clients get to that 100-pound like threshold, right? So I think, right, so obviously you've inspired them, right? You've helped them to dig in and get to one of their goals, right? So I think sometimes as I'm working with counselors, right, we kind of think that, when students get to us, that they're kind of in a place where they need that reset, and sometimes that can be the case. But I always like to remind my counselors that it's people in their general environment, right? It's not necessarily us as counselors; it's you guys. It's their family members, the other adults who they see around them. Even if we feel like people aren't necessarily looking at us, people oftentimes are. Young people are like sponges, so they see you guys. They see how you guys are dragging our butts to work even when we don't necessarily want to, or how we're kind of coping with the fact that we haven't been able to see our siblings or our friends or our significant others as well. So I just always like to toss that out there when I'm talking to just impactful adults such as you guys too. So I just want to kind of toss that out there.
Well, we appreciate that, sir. I'm gonna end the recording and actually end the show. Thank everybody for listening. This will be up sooner rather than later. I've got to put up last week's first, and then I'm going to put up this week's. So let me stop the recording.